time has come and so has Devil May Cry 5 on PC. Minus that awkward period of Capcom ports in the PS2 generation, releases in this series on PC have always been genuinely awesome. The PC versions of DMC and Devil May Cry 4 offered up performance and image quality where the console versions at times were really found lacking. But as my friend and colleague John Linneman has so wonderfully pointed out in his review, bar the base Xbox One, the consoles here are running rather well and looking pretty darn good in Devil May Cry 5. There's only that problem of unstable cutscene performance and some drops with alpha effects. With that background, I'm happy to say the PC version allows us to remedy those types of problems found on console. Did we really expect anything else? But at the same time though, the game doesn't scale that much dramatically higher. Looking right into the most graphically competent version in the Xbox One X, we can really only spot around 5 readily visible areas of the image that scale higher on PC. Shadows on Xbox One X appear to be a match for the high setting, with ultra shadows being crisper and lacking obvious aliasing and blockiness. Then you have that ambient occlusion setting, which is by its very nature going to be different on PC based upon what setting you choose. Xbox One X utilizes the standard SSAO setting, which disappears in gameplay by the way. While on PC, you can choose between HDAO and HBAO+, my preference being HBAO+, which grounds objects to the world in a more consistent manner than SSAO. Beyond this, you also have the volumetric lighting quality, which is rather sparse in its use in game. Looking at that, you are seeing a look on console that corresponds most closely with the low setting on PC, which has a blockier output and aliases on movement. Very much so like Resident Evil 2 Remastered before. Remember that mesh quality setting in Resident Evil 2, how it was high or lower on console? Well, that's the same here, as there's barely any difference between high and lower, where Ultra looks a little bit different. In fact, the array of settings is pretty much the same as we saw on Resident Evil 2 on consoles here. There's a catch here though, given the type of game Capcom was aiming for here on consoles. See, the thing is that a lot of the rest of the tweakable options on PC are really only localized to cutscenes in their entirety, or merely of a post-processing nature, and this is where my first complaint comes in, but I think it should be read as a nitpick. Sure, on PC our GPUs and CPUs can push cutscene and gameplay performance up to a lot 60 or higher, should we so choose, but just like the console version, we are barred from bringing any of that quality over to gameplay, for the most part. On consoles, gameplay cuts off a lot of volumetrics seen in the cutscenes, like that party van that Neo arrives in the first scene. Yeah, that's off in gameplay. Or motion blur, which is really awesome for communicating that sense of weight and slick stylized action to cutscenes, but it's turned off in gameplay. Gameplay also sees a culling of the rather awesome looking subsurface scattering and screen space reflections. Even screen space ambient occlusion is basically turned off on consoles when going into gameplay. When you think about it though, it makes sense. The game's targeting a rather stable 60 FPS at high resolutions on consoles, so they decided to make concessions for those gameplay graphics. The difference between cutscene and gameplay graphics cannot be changed on PC really, and I find that a missed opportunity. This can be readily seen in the graphics menu. Those settings that are only on in cutscenes basically, and are turned off in gameplay, are labeled as a variable instead of on or some other quality signifier. Even ambient occlusion is oddly weak and missing in gameplay to the point where it looks almost like it's off even when it's on. I really think a great benefit to the PC version would have been able to force these effects at their fullest as an option for gameplay and cutscenes, instead of just having a variable or off setting. As is, they only affect the look of cutscenes right now, so they do not offer much scaling to a majority of the interactive experience. Honestly, how awesome would it be to see per object motion blur on Nero as he awesomely kills demons? Or how awesome would it be to see those box projected cube maps be enhanced with screen space reflection detail? It's a bit of an elitist point for sure, but I like seeing higher end options in games. and those would definitely be more meaningful pluses to the graphics on PC than slightly higher resolution shadows or more accurate screen space ambient occlusion. But yeah, returning to that menu, we are seeing similar options to those that we saw in Resident Evil 2 Remake on PC, but we kind of have less of them now. And less of them actually affect those gameplay graphics. There's also no more comparison images to preview what they do. Oh, and the DX12 option is gone as well. I wasn't particularly missing it in Resident Evil 2 considering it ran worse there, but there is some strange behavior here. On the RTX 2080 Ti, the game booted and started in DX11 by default, while the RX 580 it booted and started in DX12. The only way to change to the other API is by editing the .ini file in the game directory where the .exe is located, and changing the 11 in this file to a 12 and vice versa. Unlike Resident Evil 2 here, in testing, purely CPU limited scenes saw absolutely no difference and are basically unreportable. And in GPU limited scenes, I saw a 2 or slightly more percentage difference on AMD and Nvidia hardware. So as I see it, DX12 need not be used. Really though, this choice should not be automated and should instead be choosable in the menu. Get on that, Capcom. Since so few of these settings actually affect gameplay, it makes the most sense to tweak those and just leave the others to the variable setting. That is, unless you are comfortable with deteriorating the effects quality of the non-interactive cinematics to try and achieve locked frame rates there. As I see it, adjusting the visual quality of the cinematics is really not worth it. Of those settings that affect in-gameplay visuals, only a handful have real meaningful performance impacts, where the rest are mainly aesthetic post-processing choices. Like Resident Evil 2 before it, and as mentioned earlier, that mesh quality option just very gently changes the level of detail distance between ultra and high. Settings below that look visually similar to high. I can't see a difference. I'm honestly not sure it's working. I also see no real performance impact. Maybe 1-2 frames? It could be invisible. Of those options that can be tweaked, the rendering mode option is one of the best bets for returning performance. This uses a form of striated reconstruction much in the same way Resident Evil 2 Remake on PC functions. And on average at 4K, I saw a 24% performance increase when setting it to on. But unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake before it, I do not find it as egregiously poor looking in this game. And actually, I could recommend its use for those of you targeting high resolutions like 4K or 1800p per chance. Still, it has artifacts, and the usage of the resolution scaler may be better for you. You should test it out on your own to find out. Another option that offers some performance back is their volumetric lighting option. Here, going from high to low, looking over here, can mean a 3% performance increase, not that much. Going from high to off saw a 6% performance increase in this scene. Not the greatest numbers, but there is a visual quality loss there. Here though, I still recommend the low settings as it's not always the best, but it's the same as on consoles, and you want to preserve your frames for the heat of the action. After this, shadows and ambient occlusion offer your best bet for getting back performance. When going from ultra to high for shadows in this scene, we saw a 4% performance uptick. Ultra to medium, 5%. Ultra to low and minimum below that, well, there's almost no performance increase. High, in my opinion, offers the best balance for visuals and preserves the shadows looking good in cutscenes. Just like Resident Evil 2, you also have the Shadow Cache option, which technically updates shadows more frequently when set to off. Going from on to off sees a 6% performance decrease, so leave this one on. My recommendations here for performance settings are very much like Resident Evil 2 at this point. Something also seen in ambient occlusion. Going from HBAO Plus to HDAO sees a 14% performance increase, but the contact shadows look rather outliney and stencily. HBAO Plus to SSAO sees a complete reduction in the visible ambient shadowing, but a 30% uptick in game. Going to off sees no performance increase in gameplay. HBAO Plus does look better than all the rest, but the AO in game is already very weak when you do the comparison. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's really there if you have the game set to SSAO. Toggling SSAO to off and vice versa does not change ambient shading in a scene. And if you also look at Xbox One X, you can see that there's no AO on in-game. SSAO is indeed what consoles use and has similar behavior there. In the end, it's hard to recommend a setting here at all, actually, as HBAO Plus is very expensive. HDAO generally looks really bad, and SSAO only seems to work properly in cutscenes. And in DF first, I have 2 recommendations. If you're looking for performance, then go to SSAO. If you're looking for visuals, well, HBAO Plus is the way to go. The last setting that offers meaningful performance visual differences are the TAA FXAA and TAA option. There is no offsetting here like in Resident Evil 2, so you just see the combination of the 2 and TAA. Going down to TAA from TAA plus FXAA sees a 2% performance improvement. I recommend the combination of the 2 in TAA plus FXAA because that's the setting that the Xbox One X appears to use, and because it helps smooth the game image on camera cuts, something I prefer with this game's aesthetic. After this, without lowering resolution, you'll be hard-pressed to increase your rendering performance in this game. The effects quality option may help in those moments where there's lots of particles and transparencies that fill the screen. Going from high to low in one instance saw a 5 to 7% performance increase, but this was with just a single effect on screen. It will obviously scale more with more effects. I recommend high though, as this game is very much so about its in-the-moment combat and how that looks. But should your FPS be tanking when you slash or shoot enemies? Well, turn this one down. The texture quality settings seem to be different than those found in Resident Evil 2 and have much less confusing nomenclature. Utilizing the ultra textures and going down to low saw that same amount of VRAM being utilized on an RTX 2080 Ti at 7.8 GB at 4K. Only dropping down to the minimum texture quality setting saw a drop in VRAM utilization that was also accompanied by an obvious shift downward in texture quality, where it was now utilizing 6.1 GB at 4K. Like Resident Evil 2, I assume there's some caching going on here, going up to as much as your GPU can to prevent as much visible texture streaming as possible. Should you have any stuttering though, I recommend turning this setting down to try and alleviate it. Should you experience obvious texture swapping but have VRAM to spare, well, turn it up. This really though is the extent to scaling of gameplay visuals. But should you be so curious, turning off SSR leads to around a 6 to 7% performance increase in cutscenes. Per object motion blur, 5 to 8%. Subsurface scattering, around 4 to 8% performance increase when it's off. I honestly do not recommend turning these off though, as you're losing out on visual quality in the cutscenes, of which there are many in this game, and it's one of the game's great strengths. So in the end, my recommended settings are basically those exact same as found on consoles, but with ultra mesh quality and the optional use of HBAO Plus should you have a preference, and the optional usage of interlacing should you also have that preference. In the end, you will have a choice when going for performance. Do you want the highest resolution for gameplay to achieve your frame rate goal? Or do you want to lower that resolution to achieve that same frame rate goal in the cutscenes as well? Cutscenes are so much heavier in gameplay in this game. Since the game has so many cutscenes and they look so darn good, I think we should leverage the advantage that the option of choice has here on PC and try and target a more or less locked experience. That would mean reducing the resolution in general to make up for the disparity in GPU load between gameplay and cutscenes, and I'm honestly fine with that. Utilizing our optimized settings with SSAO and native resolution, we can see how at 1440p the GTX 1060 and RX 580 do pretty well in the cutscenes actually, with the RX 580 being almost there basically for a locked cutscene experience, either adding in an overclock here or, if you're crazy, dropping one of the cutscene exclusive effects would push it up, I think. In gameplay though, with these settings both GPUs stay healthily above 60 FPS with a good amount of headroom, and that RX 580 maintaining a strong 15% or more lead at some times. If you wanted to sacrifice that cutscene performance more and spice up gameplay, perhaps adding HBAO Plus could be doable for large parts of the gameplay experience. Then it would be interesting to see what happens when we go up a notch to 4K and use those same settings, but utilizing that game's interlace reconstruction setting. Cutscenes show a very similar experience to that what we see on console, with wildly fluctuating frame rates below 60 FPS on both GPUs, with the RX 580 maintaining an even stronger 18% lead almost. Going into gameplay, the RX 580 manages to keep very close to that 60 FPS line, and the GTX 1060 falls pretty short. Large explosions and alpha effects close to the camera will drop below 60 here, so I imagine turning down the effects setting could claw back performance should you be targeting such a high resolution. But honestly, I think 1440p is the sweet spot for these cards, and especially that RX 580. Those cutscenes at a more fluid frame rate look so nice. Beyond the performance of mid-range, the RTX 2080 Ti at 4K coupled with a Ryzen 1700X and 16GB of 3200MHz DDR4 is basically locked at 4K 60 at the highest settings possible. And turning that down to console-like settings, well, you can basically get 120 FPS gameplay at 4K. And really, unless you are on a really old i5 or i3 or something lower, not much is going to be getting in the way and preventing you from getting a near 120 FPS minimum, as my DX11 and DX12 CPU testing shows. Speaking of high performance, I really ought to mention a bug I encountered. Sometimes, but not always, audio will desync in cutscenes, and I think it's related to having the frame rate set to variable and not 60 with the in-game limiter. Check it out here with variable.
'Cause I'm bringing the fire.
This is how it is with the lock.
Oh, I get it. Who brought the marshmallows? 'Cause I'm bringing the fire.
At the same time, rerunning this cutscene another time did not reproduce the bug. So maybe it only occasionally happens, but I had it happen in other cutscenes as well with the variable option in use. Next to those bugs, I've also experienced multiple crashes leading to this error, both in DX12 and DX11. 21:9 users, well, you're unfortunately left out in the cold here as the game does not officially work at your aspect ratio, so wait for a patch or keep your eyes out for mods on the PC Gaming Wiki. Beyond those unfortunate problems, we also got wind of the existence of a legally attainable executable of the game through Steam, which is lacking the digital rights management software of Denuvo, which basically exists to try and prevent piracy. I have always been against the existence of such software in the first place, as it hurts normal consumers in my opinion on multiple levels, but there were reports of 20% performance improvements by utilizing this alternative executable, so I thought it would be worth the look. Utilizing the RX 580 on an i5 8400, I was really only able to show a 7% performance increase by utilizing the executable without DRM protection. But that is just in extremely CPU limited scenarios. To make sure it was the only limiting factor in the CPU, I played at the lowest settings possible, at 480p, and utilizing the interlacing setting to make the game as GPU bound as it possibly could. When doing such, the DRM version of the game never even dropped below 155 FPS in combat. Let that sink in. It will not affect normal use cases at all, but still, we measured 7% in a like for like, so it is there, and it is in itself disappointing in that regard. It would be better if it cost 0% and did not exist at all. If you have lower end CPU than an i5 8400, well, then the difference may be more stark, and it may affect your gameplay performance more, honestly. So there you have it. DMC5 on PC is the best version of the game, and sometimes that's all I really want. But I would also prefer if it excelled along with being the best. Capcom needs to make sure they support 21:9 displays. They need to sort out any crashes. And they really should also allow us to force all graphical effects in normal gameplay. That variable option on PC should also have a force option above it so we can see motion blur, screen space reflections, and other effects on in normal gameplay. That would make the PC version awesome and stand the test of time. Let us hope the results of this video, though, do not stand the test of time, and all these changes are implemented. In the meantime, though, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. If you are already a subscriber, please hit that little bell button in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you would like to talk to me about Devil May Cry 5 and what in the hell a Devil Trigger is, write a comment below or follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. And as always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.